I watched my wife's face turn from a mask of pure, breathless lust to a deathly, bone chilling pale the second she realized I was the one sitting in that velvet hotel armchair, not the man she was expecting. The champagne she'd pre ordered for him was bubbling in a silver bucket right next to me, the condensation dripping like slow, cold sweat. In that moment, the air in room 412 became so thin I could practically hear her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic, trapped animal sound. It's funny how 10 years of marriage can be dismantled in the 3 seconds it takes for a light switch to flick on. Have you ever had a gut feeling so heavy it felt like you were carrying a lead weight in your stomach every single day? That intuition that screams at you while you're brushing your teeth or driving to work, telling you that the person sleeping next to you is a stranger? If you've ever sat across the dinner table from someone you loved, looking into their eyes and realizing they were looking right through you at someone else, I need you to drop a comment right now. Just tell me I'm not crazy. Where are you watching this from? I'm sharing this because I spent months gaslighting myself, thinking I was the insecure one, the crazy husband, until the truth finally ripped me open. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Honestly, after what I'm about to tell you, you'll realize that sometimes the person you'd take a bullet for is the one pulling the trigger. My name is Shane, and for a long time, I thought I was living the American dream. I had the house with the wraparound porch in a quiet suburb of Virginia, a successful career in logistics that I'd spent my 20s building from the ground up. And I had Tiffany. To everyone in our circle, Tiffany was the gold standard. She was the one who hosted the best Thanksgiving dinners, the one who always looked like she'd stepped out of a high end catalogue even at 6 a.m. The supportive wife who stood by me when my first business venture collapsed into debt 6 years ago. We were a team, or so I thought. But the thing about the perfect life is that it's usually held together by very expensive glue and a lot of lies. The shift didn't happen overnight, it was a slow decay, like a house rotting from the inside out while the exterior paint stayed fresh. About a year ago, the intimacy didn't just fade, it vanished. Tiffany started staying late at her marketing firm, claiming a new luxury account required her constant attention. Suddenly, there were new passwords on every device. There were girls' trips to Vegas that left her coming home exhausted and distant, smelling like a brand of expensive, musky men's cologne that I definitely didn't own. I remember one night specifically. It was a Tuesday, around 2 a.m. I woke up and the bed was cold. I found her in the kitchen, backlit by the glow of the refrigerator, staring at her phone with a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. It wasn't just a happy smile, it was a hungry one. When she saw me, her thumb swiped the screen so fast it was violent. She told me she was just checking a work email. I wanted to believe her. I desperately wanted to be the clueless husband because the alternative, the reality that my world was a lie, was too much to bear. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. I was looking for a specific box of old Christmas ornaments in the attic, the ones we bought on our honeymoon in Italy. Instead, I found a small, nondescript black box tucked behind a stack of old tax returns. Inside was a burner phone. It wasn't locked. Tiffany had always been arrogant. She never thought I'd look in the boring part of the house. I sat on that dusty attic floor for 2 hours, scrolling through hundreds of messages between her and a man named Bryce. Bryce wasn't a stranger. He was my former college roommate, a guy I had helped get a job at the very firm Tiffany worked for. The messages were graphic, cruel, and meticulously planned. They laughed about my boring work ethic. They joked about how I was funding their secret weekend getaways. They even had a countdown to our upcoming anniversary, which they called Freedom Day, because that was the day she planned to serve me divorce papers after ensuring she'd squeezed enough out of our joint investment account to start a new life with him. The pain didn't hit me in the way I expected. There was no screaming, no breaking of furniture. It was a cold, surgical precision that took over my nervous system. Every ounce of love I had for her evaporated, replaced by a singular, icy focus. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't even mention the phone. I put it back exactly where I found it and walked downstairs. I looked at her sitting on the couch, sipping wine and scrolling through Instagram, and I didn't see my wife. I saw a target. The following weeks were a masterclass in acting. I played the doting, oblivious husband better than she played the faithful wife. I kissed her goodbye every morning, knowing exactly who she was texting the second I pulled out of the driveway. I even bought her flowers, watching her eyes fill with a fake, performative guilt that she'd quickly mask with a smile. Behind the scenes, I was meeting with Gabe, a private investigator who specialized in high stakes infidelity. Gabe was a guy who didn't care about feelings. He cared about timestamps, bank statements, and high resolution photos. She's clever, Shane, Gabe told me during one of our secret meetings at a greasy diner 3 towns over. But she's sloppy because she thinks you're weak. She's been moving money into a shell account under her maiden name. She thinks she's going to leave you with the mortgage and the debt while she and Bryce run off to that condo they've been eyeing in Miami. I looked at the photos Gabe slid across the table. Tiffany and Bryce laughing at an outdoor cafe. Tiffany and Bryce entering a boutique hotel while I was supposedly on a business trip in Atlanta. I felt a surge of nausea, but I pushed it down. I needed to be colder. I needed to wait for the perfect moment. The moment where her humiliation would be absolute and her loss would be total. Then came the anniversary surprise. Tiffany told me she'd booked a healing spa weekend for herself at a luxury resort 2 hours away, claiming she needed me time to work on her mental health so we could reconnect afterward. It was a classic move. She even asked me for $2,000 for the package, which I gave her with a smile, knowing she was actually using it to book a penthouse suite for her and Bryce. The morning she left, she hugged me. She smelled like the perfume I bought her for her birthday. "I'll miss you, babe," she whispered. "When I get back, everything's going to be different, I promise." I watched her SUV disappear down the street, and for the first time in months, I let out a breath that didn't feel like glass in my lungs. I waited exactly 1 hour before I went upstairs, packed a small bag, and grabbed the folder Gabe had prepared for me. It contained every flight record, every hotel receipt, and a detailed map of the financial trail she thought she'd buried. I arrived at the hotel 3 hours before her check-in time. I'd used my own connections to book the room directly adjacent to the one she'd reserved under a fake name, and through a generous tip to a disgruntled front desk clerk who recognized me from my logistics firm's holiday parties, I managed to get the key card to her suite. The room was beautiful. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a king-sized bed covered in rose petals, and that silver bucket of champagne. She'd really gone all out for him. I sat down in the heavy leather armchair in the corner of the room, positioned perfectly so that I'd be the first thing she saw when she walked through the door. I turned off the main lights, leaving only the dim glow of the city skyline filtered through the sheer curtains. I waited. The silence of the hotel room was heavy, punctuated only by the distant hum of the elevator. Every minute felt like an hour. I thought about our wedding day, the vows we took, and how she'd turned those promises into a weapon to use against me. I felt the cold weight of the divorce papers in my lap, the edges of the manila envelope sharp against my palms. Finally, I heard the muffled sound of laughter in the hallway. Her laughter, that high-pitched, melodic sound I used to love. Then, the distinct beep of the electronic lock. The door swung open, and the lights flickered on as she stepped inside, tossing her designer handbag onto the bed. Her face lit up with an expectant, radiant glow that vanished into a mask of pure terror the moment her eyes met mine. I didn't move a muscle, my fingers just slowly tracing the cold, condensation-slicked glass of the champagne bottle as I watched the blood drain from her lips. Her designer handbag hit the plush carpet with a heavy metallic thud, the gold hardware echoing like a gunshot in the sterile silence of room 412. Tiffany froze, her hand still hovering over the light switch, her chest heaving as she tried to process the reality of my silhouette in that chair. The radiant, flirtatious glow she'd carried into the room evaporated, replaced by a grey, sickly pallor that made her look 10 years older in an instant. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, my thumb tracing the rim of the crystal flute she'd intended for Bryce, watching her pupils dilate until her eyes were nothing but black voids of panic. "Shane, she finally choked out, her voice cracking like dry parchment. What? What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at the office. You thought I was the same man I was 6 months ago. I cut her off, my voice coming out as a low, terrifyingly calm rasp. I didn't recognize my own tone. It was the sound of someone who had already finished grieving and had moved straight into the execution phase. You thought I was the guy who would just keep paying the bills and asking no questions while you spent my hard-earned money on silk sheets for another man. She tried to laugh, a high, brittle sound that bordered on hysteria. Honey, you're scaring me. This is just... I wanted to surprise you. I booked this room for us. I was going to call you in an hour and tell you to drive up. It was supposed to be a romantic reset. The audacity of the lie was almost breathtaking. I looked at the bed, strewn with rose petals she'd coordinated with the concierge, and then back at her. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, something backless and expensive, shimmering under the hotel LED lights. I stood up slowly, the floorboards seemingly groaning under the weight of the tension. I walked over to the vanity where she dropped her phone and picked it up. A romantic reset? I asked, holding the device between two fingers like it was a piece of radioactive waste. Is that what you and Bryce call it in your Freedom Day countdown? Or does the reset involve the $50,000 you skimmed from our joint savings to deposit into that secret account in Delaware? The color didn't just leave her face then. It left her entire body. She staggered back until her shoulders hit the doorframe. The perfect wife mask was shattered, the porcelain pieces littering the floor between us. For years, I had worshipped the ground this woman walked on. I had worked 80-hour weeks so she could have the life she dreamed of. I had defended her against my own family when they said she seemed distant. And all that time, she was sharpening the knife she planned to bury in my back. I can explain, she whispered, the classic refrain of the caught predator. I don't need an explanation, Tiffany. I have receipts. I have photos. I have the GPS logs from your car for the last 4 months. I have everything. I pulled a thick manila envelope from the side of the chair and tossed it onto the bed. It landed right in the center of the heart-shaped rose petal arrangement. That's your life, summarized by a private investigator. Every lie, every hotel stay, every dime you stole. I watched her eyes dart toward the envelope, then toward the door, looking for an exit that didn't exist. The psychological shift was fascinating to witness. The guilt didn't last long. It was quickly replaced by a sharp, defensive anger. She realized the game was up, and the sweetness she'd used to manipulate me for a decade vanished, revealing the cold, calculating woman underneath. So what? She snapped, her voice regaining its edge, her posture straightening as she transitioned from victim to combatant. So I found someone who actually pays attention to me, someone who isn't obsessed with logistics and spreadsheets. You ignored me for years, Shane. You practically pushed me into his arms. I was building a future for us, I said, my heart feeling like a block of ice. I was working so you could have the house, the cars, the security, and you used that security to fund a betrayal with my roommate, the guy I practically fed when he was broke. Bryce understands me, she spat, her eyes flashing with a cruel triumph. He's everything you aren't. And guess what? You can't just throw me out. We're in a community property state. I'm taking half of everything. The house, the business, the investments. You're going to be the one left with nothing by the time my lawyers are done with you. I almost smiled. It was the reaction I'd been waiting for. She thought she was still in control of the narrative. She thought this was a standard divorce where she'd walk away with a massive payout and her lover by her side. She had no idea that I hadn't spent the last 3 weeks just crying in my office. I had spent them with Gabe and a forensic accountant, untangling the web she'd spun. You think Bryce is waiting for you? I asked, tilting my head. You think he's downstairs in the lobby, ready to whisk you away to that condo in Miami? He loves me, she said, though a flicker of doubt finally crossed her face. He loves the money you told him I had, I corrected her. But Bryce has a type, Tiffany. Did you know he's been seeing a 22-year-old paralegal at your firm for the last 6 months? The same one he takes to the work lunches you thought he was having with clients? I have photos of that too. They're on page 12 of that folder. She lunged for the envelope then, her manicured nails tearing at the paper. I watched her flip through the pages, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she saw the evidence of her own lover's betrayal. It was the ultimate irony. The woman who cheated on her husband was being cheated on by the man she blew up her life for. The silence in the room returned, heavier than before, as she stared at a photo of Bryce kissing another woman in a parking lot just 3 days ago. He wouldn't, she whimpered, the fight draining out of her as she collapsed onto the edge of the bed, scattering the rose petals. He would. And he did, I said, stepping closer until I was standing right over her. But that's not the best part. You see, Tiffany, I didn't just come here to start the process of reclaiming my life. While you were planning your spa weekend, I was signing the paperwork to freeze all our joint accounts due to suspected fraudulent activity, specifically the money you've been illegally siphoning. I leaned down, my face inches from hers, smelling the expensive wine on her breath and the desperation in her pores. I wanted her to feel the absolute vacuum of the future she had created for herself. No husband, no lover, no secret nest egg, just the cold, hard reality of her own choices. You thought you were the smartest person in the room, I whispered, but you forgot one thing. I'm a logistics expert. I track things for a living, and I've tracked you right into a corner you can't talk your way out of. She looked up at me, tears finally streaming down her face, but I felt nothing, not a shred of pity. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a secondary device. Not the burner phone, but a small digital recorder. I pressed stop, the little red light blinking off, signifying that every word of her confession, her justification, and her admission of financial theft was now immortalized in high-definition audio. I turned toward the window, looking out at the city lights, the same lights she thought would be the backdrop to her new beginning. Without a word of goodbye, I walked toward the heavy oak door of the suite, my footsteps silent on the carpet, and placed my hand on the cold brass handle. The heavy oak door didn't click shut behind me because I didn't leave. Not yet. I just stood there with my palm pressed against the cold grain of the wood, feeling the vibrations of her jagged sobs echoing through the room. It was a pathetic, hollow sound. The sound of a woman who wasn't mourning a marriage, but the death of her own vanity. I turned back around, watching her clutch that manila folder like a life raft in a storm of her own making. The rose petals she'd so carefully arranged were now crushed under her trembling knees, staining the white duvet like bruised skin. "You think this is it?" she hissed through her tears, her head snapping up, eyes red-rimmed, but still burning with a desperate, venomous defiance. "You think you can just record a conversation and leave? I'm still your wife, Shane. Half of that logistics firm is mine. Half of the house is mine. You can't just erase 10 years because you caught me in a hotel room." I let out a short, dry laugh that felt like gravel in my throat. I walked back toward the center of the room, my shadow stretching long and dark across the floor. That's the thing about you, Tiffany. You always underestimated my boring attention to detail. You thought I was just staring at spreadsheets all day. But when you start treating our joint business accounts like your personal ATM to buy Bryce watches and weekend getaways, that's not just adultery. That's embezzlement. That's a felony. I pulled out my phone and tapped a few buttons. "And about that supportive family of yours, the ones who always told me I wasn't good enough for their little princess?" I turned the screen toward her. It was a Zoom link, scheduled for exactly 10 minutes from now. The invitees, her parents, her sister, and the CEO of the marketing firm where she worked, the man who prided himself on his company's family values and unshakable ethics. "What are you doing?" she gasped, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. She scrambled toward me, her silk dress rustling frantically. "Shane, don't, please. My father, his heart, he can't take this. My job, I've worked so hard for that VP position." "You worked hard at being a fraud," I retorted, stepping back so she couldn't touch me. The repulsion I felt was visceral now, a physical barrier she couldn't cross. "You wanted a life of luxury and excitement, right? You wanted to be the star of your own little drama? Well, the curtain is going up, Tiffany, and I've made sure everyone has a front row seat to the premiere." I could see the gears turning in her head, the frantic search for a new lie, a new manipulation. But for the first time in our relationship, Her beauty had no power over me. The tears looked like cheap theatre makeup. The trembling hands looked like a rehearsed act. I realized then that I didn't hate her. Hate requires passion. What I felt was a profound, chilling indifference. She was just a logistical error I was finally correcting. Please, she sobbed, sinking back onto the floor, her pride finally dissolving into raw, ugly desperation. We can talk about this. I'll give back the money. I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't do this to me. Don't destroy everything I've built. You destroyed it the second you let him touch you in our bed, I said, my voice flat. I'm just the one documenting the wreckage. The clock on the nightstand ticked toward the hour. This was the moment I had replayed in my head 1,000 times during those sleepless nights in the attic. The confrontation wasn't about shouting, it was about the total, systematic removal of her safety net. I wanted her to feel the exact moment the ground vanished beneath her feet. I walked over to the desk and opened the laptop I'd brought with me. The screen glowed, illuminating the dark room with a harsh, clinical light. I logged into the meeting. One by one, the boxes popped up, her father looking confused in his study, her boss leaning forward in his high-back leather chair, her sister holding a glass of wine, expecting a casual family update. Hi everyone, I said into the microphone, my face a mask of calm composure. Tiffany was huddled on the floor just out of the camera's view, her hand over her mouth to stifle her whimpering. I'm sorry for the late night call, but I have some news regarding Tiffany and the future of our family assets that I felt you all needed to hear directly from the source. The next 20 minutes were a blur of cold facts and devastating evidence. I didn't embellish. I didn't call her names. I simply shared my screen and showed them the bank transfers. I showed them the hotel logs. I showed them the photos of her and Bryce. I watched her father's face turn a shade of purple I'll never forget. I watched her boss's expression harden into stone as he realized his top executive was a liability. Tiffany, her father's voice cracked through the speakers, sounding broken and ancient. Tiffany, tell me he's lying. Tell me this is some kind of sick joke. She couldn't speak. She just sat there in the shadows of room 412, a fallen queen in a ruined palace, listening to her world crumble through a digital speaker. The silence that followed her lack of response was the most honest thing that had happened in our marriage in years. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning, I told the group, my voice steady. The forensic audit is already complete. Gabe, my investigator, will be sending over the full file to the relevant parties shortly. I suggest you all reach out to her on her personal line. I'm done being her spokesperson. I ended the call and shut the laptop with a definitive thud. The room went dark again, save for the flickering neon sign of a bar across the street. Tiffany was silent now, her eyes fixed on the rose petals, her breathing shallow and ragged. She had lost her family's respect, her career, and her financial security in less than 30 minutes. The gold standard was officially bankrupt. I picked up my bag and straightened my coat. I felt lighter than I had in years, as if a physical weight had been lifted from my chest. I walked toward the door one last time, but before I opened it, I reached into the champagne bucket and pulled out the bottle. It was still cold, the label peeling from the ice. I walked to the bathroom, popped the cork with a muted thud, and poured the entire bottle of expensive vintage down the drain. I walked back into the room, past my wife, who is now just a stranger shivering on a hotel carpet, and stepped out into the hallway. I didn't look back as I pressed the button for the elevator, the golden light of the display reflecting in my eyes as I waited for the doors to slide open and take me back down to the real world. The elevator doors hissed shut, sealing away the sound of Tiffany's muffled weeping and the suffocating scent of that floral hotel room. As the floor indicator descended in a rhythmic, golden countdown, I caught my reflection in the polished brass panels. I didn't see a victim anymore. I didn't see the man who spent nights shivering in his own attic clutching a burner phone. I saw Shane, the man who had finally taken out the trash. By the time I hit the lobby, the cold night air of Virginia slapped me across the face, and for the first time in a decade, it tasted like oxygen instead of ash. I walked to my car, tossed the folder into the passenger seat, and just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. My hands weren't shaking. That was the most surprising part. The adrenaline had leveled off into a steady, calm hum of liberation. I pulled out of the parking lot, watching the luxury hotel shrink in my rearview mirror, a monument to a life I was no longer interested in living. The months that followed were a grueling, methodical deconstruction of our existence. Because of the evidence Gabe and I had gathered, the community property argument Tiffany's lawyers tried to use crumbled like wet cardboard. In the state of Virginia, proving financial infidelity, the actual theft of marital funds to support an affair, is a powerful lever. By the time the ink dried on the final decree, Tiffany walked away with exactly what she brought into the marriage: a suitcase and a mountain of debt from the secret accounts she'd racked up. She lost the house, her share of the firm, and most importantly, she lost the perfect reputation she'd spent a lifetime cultivating. I heard through the grapevine that Bryce dropped her the moment the freeze on our accounts went through. A man like that doesn't stick around for better or worse part. He was only there for the better. Last I heard, she moved back into her parents' basement. The same parents who now barely speak to her after the shame of that Zoom call. It's a harsh reality, but that's the thing about burning bridges. You have to be careful which side you're standing on when the fire starts. As for me, I sold the suburban house. Every corner of that place felt haunted by the ghost of a woman who never actually existed. I moved into a modern loft downtown, closer to my office, where the only sounds at night are the city traffic and the hum of my own peace of mind. My business is thriving because I'm no longer distracted by the weight of a dying relationship. I've started hiking again, things I stopped doing because she hated the dirt. I'm rediscovering the version of Shane that existed before he tried to become a background character in someone else's vanity project. Looking back, the betrayal was the most painful thing I've ever endured, but it was also the most necessary. It woke me up. It taught me that self-worth isn't something you find in another person's eyes, it's something you build with your own two hands. I learned that being the nice guy doesn't mean being a doormat, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away and let the people who hurt you deal with the consequences of their own actions. If you're sitting there right now scrolling through your partner's phone or feeling that sickening knot in your stomach because something doesn't add up, listen to me. Trust yourself. Don't yell, don't scream, and don't give away your hand. Get your ducks in a row, find your Gabe, and remember that you deserve a life that isn't built on a foundation of sand. It's never too late to hit the reset button and start a chapter where you're finally the hero, not the casualty. I'm standing on my balcony now, looking out at the horizon, and the sky is finally clear. I'm Shane, and I'm finally free. If this story resonated with you, or if you've walked through the fire and come out stronger on the other side, please share your journey in the comments below. Your strength might be the lifeline someone else needs today. Hit that subscribe button to join our community of survivors. Let's keep moving forward, one honest step at a time. I'll see you in the next one.